Void War is a game that follows in the footsteps of Faster Than Light in terms of a space-faring roguelite. It's been a long time since pretty much any game has done this, and I've enjoyed playing Void War for many hours at this point. However, Void War is a pretty tough game. Whether you are a veteran of Faster Than Light or someone that has never touched this type of game before, there is a lot of learning that needs to be done in order to get comfortable with Void War and climb in the Torment levels. This video is my attempt to give people some pointers on how Void War is different than Faster Than Light and some good practices that you should keep an eye out for with Void War, as I've now reached pretty much through all the Torment levels, and I want to help other people out, as I definitely see a lot of people struggling with the game at all the different levels. The background of this video is just going to be some gameplay of me doing some high Torment runs, so if you're not interested in watching that, you can even put this on in the background. But regardless, let's go ahead and talk about probably the single biggest thing that differs between Void War and something like Faster Than Light, and that is that boarding is a fundamental thing of Void War. In Faster Than Light, boarding was a nice alternative way that if you got a solid boarding crew, you could utilize it to gain extra rewards from crew killing. Void War does not have any innate bonuses for crew killing compared to blowing up the enemy ship. The main difference comes from chests. Chests are items on the enemy's ships of yellow or red or a variety of colors that need your crew members to stand in that room and open them up to give you bonus rewards. This makes boarding very important to have, as especially on higher torments, those additional resources are going to make up a larger and larger portion of your total scrap income. Combined with the fact that many rewards and shops will be entirely about selling you more crew members, giving you ways to board the enemy ship, or just equipment that you can equip on your units in order to power them up in combat. And boarding is something that pretty much you should look for in every single run. It is a very reliable method of also being able to bring down shields, as killing enemy crew members damages rooms, meaning that if you can get into the enemy shield room and kill a couple of them, that can disable their shields, making your armaments far more effective at crippling the enemy ship. Whenever you go to any shop, always keep an eye out for things like translocators, dark matter prisms, or things like Aetherwalk. Even just having one or two crew members that can board the enemy ship is a very useful thing to have, as it just allows you to effectively deal with problems that you might not otherwise be prepared for. And that is a theme that Void War has throughout pretty much its entire game. You want to make use of multiple systems and ways to engage the enemy to be the most effective and eventually deal with the boss. Staying on the topic of boarding, another thing that I will mention is that you should treat the health of your crew members as a resource. Health naturally regenerates every time you make a jump in Void War. You get 15% of a unit's total health back, meaning on average units are generally gaining about 8 to 15 HP every jump, depending on their size and overall health pool. And it's important to understand that if you are only losing that amount of health and essentially are fully healing between jumps, it's like you're practically never losing health in the first place. Even if it takes a couple jumps, this allows you to take fights better and not stress as much about it. Of course, you have to be careful to not let your crew members die, but you should not be afraid to, for example, throw your boarder onto a possessed ship if it means you can get a couple quick kills, bring down its shields, and more effectively engage it. You will get that health back relatively quickly. Just don't let people drop to, 5, 10 HP and have to sit there for multiple jumps, at least until you have some sort of healing system like Psyker spells or a medbay. Overall, you cannot neglect boarding when it comes to Void War. It is a fundamental thing, and you need to make sure you are actively using it and keeping an eye out of ways to get boarding potential, because when you start doing that, you will probably find it becomes a lot easier to deal with certain enemy ships that otherwise cause you a lot of headaches. Now, a couple things that are tangentially related to boarding are a couple different things related to how you control yourself during a game, and a couple settings that I want to recommend messing with. The first thing I want to suggest is going into settings and turning on precise crew movement. Essentially, precise crew movement allows you to control the exact space a unit moves into. And this is something that might not matter in the beginning of your games on lower torments, but as you climb up, it will become very, very important in order to have this enabled. The reason for this is that you are able to micro your units. Being able to move your crew member into a specific space to fight a specific threat is going to be very, very important. A basic example of this is if you are having a enemy knight, these very high health 5 DPS monsters that are boarding your ship and are going to be killing your crew, you want to have your high health unit being the one taking the damage. If you have your crappy 20 health units in the melee with the enemy knight, they're going to get stomped and killed almost instantly. So instead, you want to have your big guy in that specific space where he will be the one taking the damage of the knight, and then have your other crew members in spaces that aren't occupied, and then they are able to provide their damage still. It allows you to use those low health units and crew members that otherwise seem very squishy, and if you micro them well, you can get a lot more value out of them, either being cheap DPS, good crew members, or just being able to overall hold their own a lot better when they're not stuck fighting enemies because you can't perfectly micro who's fighting who. On top of precise crew movement, you also need to get in the habit of using command mode pretty much anytime anything happens in the game. If you're watching my gameplay in this video so far, you will see that pretty much anytime anything happens, I am using command mode to pause the game and make sure I'm not missing anything and trying to get the most out of my units and firearms and all that. When you click spacebar, at least with the basic controls, you will completely pause the game. And this allows you to queue up orders, such as moving your characters to specific spaces. It allows you to set up a high-powered barrage with all of your weapons. And it allows you to use consumables in crucial moments before you need to worry about, like, being quick enough with it. If you are not using pause, you are likely finding that things can spiral very, very hard out of control if you start taking damage or needing to manage multiple fights. Use pause constantly, and you will find it is very useful to not make this game an absolute sweat fest. As I said a second ago, there is also things of queuing up all your weapons to fire at once. And this is definitely something that you should also be doing. Because in games like Faster Than Light and Void War, the biggest thing for crippling the enemy ship is getting through their shields. And as such, if you're not able to board and blow up their shields through crew kills, you need to overwhelm those shields. And in order to do that, you need to fire all of your weapons, ideally at once. The only weapons that really should be on auto fire are a small handful of weapons like the auto disruptor that has a 3-second charge time and spams ion. Otherwise, you want to try to group it up to where your ions and whatnot hit first, then right after your main laser weapons hit, and then when the shields go down, you want to again immediately pause the game and use your beam weapons so the shields don't block any of those things. This is something you'll probably discover over time, but generally you need to group your fire in order to be effective with armaments. Speaking of armaments, another thing is to also make sure you buy other weapon systems. Things like the Missile Bay, the Hull Reaper, the various siege weapons, these things can all stack together to make your offensive power much more capable, and they do so at a generally pretty effective price. A weapons bay gets very expensive once you're reaching levels like 6, 7, 8 for weapons. It just becomes very intensive when you're having to dump, 100 plus scrap into each power bar on your weapon system. Compare that to something like the Missile Bay, where you pay 45 for the Missile Bay and then 1 power bar, and you have a weapon that is able to go through shields, it's able to hurt systems. You can add utility by buying or finding different missiles. It's a very cost-effective system. Or do something like the Hull Reaper. The Hull Reaper is able to act as a free-use beam weapon. It costs munitions to use, but that is totally fine because you're able to heal your ship and have a beam weapon that is not reliant on your weapon power. You want to have a combined arms approach when it comes to your firepower because it allows you to just more effectively get through enemy ships and really mess them up when you get that opening. Now, to shift topics a bit away from weapons and boarding and whatnot, there's a couple other things that I want to talk about that aren't related to those as much. I'll just rattle them off pretty much in order. So the first thing I want to talk about is the crew size. In Void War, there is no limit to how big your crew can technically become, and as such, large, diverse crews are generally quite nice. The reason for this is that having a big crew members means that you can have a lot of guys that are either manning all your systems, they're able to help fight enemy boarders, you can build a border team without demanning too many of your systems, and you can even have crew members that are legitimately there just to be like a spellcaster or just someone that can hold a consumable in an empty tool slot. Speaking of which, consumables are really, really good, and you need to use them. If you are not using consumables, at least in the final boss fight, you are going to struggle a lot more than if you did. Consumables are extremely powerful for summoning additional units. You're able to have things like hull repair, being able to give you healing in the middle of a fight. You can also take things like the repair bot, which is a godly system that allows you to quickly repair a damaged system if you need it. There is just a lot of items that are extremely powerful and can dig you out of situations that you otherwise might end up dying from. So it's very, very important to make sure you have a crew that can support holding multiple consumables because it will dramatically increase your power when you really need it. On top of that, having a big diverse crew has further benefits, most notably in that you are able to find more gold events. Look for multiple different factions. Having, for example, a blood cultist in a blood cult area makes it much easier to find gold events that often just give you flat out positive rewards. You can also find good raider events. Sometimes there are events that are specific to certain units, like the Imperial Marshal has the ability to track down some, I believe, bounty hunters and give you a reward for doing so. Of course, you should not buy crew members on the chance that you get like a specific event, but it is definitely very useful to have a diversity in there because finding more gold events means that you often don't have to take fights, get advantages in fights, get bigger rewards, special items, and all that, which can help power you up significantly. Now, all these tips are generally useful and are going to allow you to handle fights a lot better, you get more positive rewards, and generally you will perform a lot better even as you climb in the torment levels. However, it is important to note that sometimes it is better to just run from a fight than stand your ground. Losing 20 health on your ship in order to beat one demon ship that got a lucky missile barrage and crippled your shields that led to your weapons going down is just not going to be worth it. And you sometimes just need to understand that and run away. You should really not be running away constantly because then you're going to lose too many rewards. But it can be the right move to sometimes just realize that a fight is going really poorly and to just jump away and try to recover and reset instead of just taking a bunch of damage or getting your crew killed or whatever, because those losses are not going to be recuperated from a 30 scrap reward or even less from one enemy ship. And the final thing I'm going to talk about today is to plan your route through sectors. You should always, always, always be keeping an eye out for where rest stops, shops, or a major threat is. These things are going to be important, and you don't want to end up skipping over a rest stop that you might really want, or going to a shop that has a specific thing you might be looking for. You know, it would suck if you're trying to find like a special weapon system and you end up skipping over shops that would contain such things. So always make sure that when you go into a sector to plan your routes, make sure that you always go in ways that allow you to pivot in case things go wrong. Like if you have a split choice between going to a rest zone and a normal jump, then go to the one that lets you choose between those rather than one that commits you to the rest stop if you are already in a good spot. Because rest stops become less valuable the stronger you are. They're good when you're in a bad situation, but if you are already doing well, you'd rather go to a normal area and potentially get into another fight, get more scrap, and all of that. Now, that is probably some of the larger tips that I could give. We can go into more specifics, but that's not for this video. I plan to probably make more videos on Void War, which will cover more specific things like dealing with the bosses, which are easily the toughest thing in the game, or talking about like commanders and all that. But if there's something specific people are interested in learning about or having explained, leave a comment down below on what you would like to see. Hopefully some people find this useful, and if you have found it useful, maybe consider liking and subscribing as well in order to not miss out on maybe some future Void War content I make or anything else I do. But thank you so much for watching if you've watched all the way to the end, and I hope you have a good day. Also, I'm just going to let this last little clip play itself out so you can see me kill this last possessed ship.